So we can look at knowledge as a result of information processing in nature, in different sorts of natural agents, which learn to take information from the world and to use it to survive and to try and grow. So this is the idea that we start from the data, something that we get from the outside world. Any agent, cognitive agent, gets data from the outside. It connects it with the data they have in memory and other structures into information, and pieces of information are structured in knowledge. There is a lot to say about this, but I will say just little to leave you a place for some discussion at the end. So I mentioned already Matrana and Varela, and this naturalist idea of cognition as a property of any living organism. Cognition can be said as a restructuring of an agent through interaction with the environment. And this is a very interesting process of taking in information and changing informational structures, which happens based on information self-organization. This self-organization is a physical process, which we call natural computation or morphological computation, because the form, morphology, forms the computation. We have discussions in community of computability people and computing theorists and people who are active in cognition, computational cognition, about the difference between analog and discrete, continuous and symbolic, sub-symbolic versions of information representation. Because some people will say, okay, computation, it means that you manipulate discrete units. So you must suppose, if you have computing nature, you must suppose that the nature is discrete. So that the final nature is discrete. It comes in discrete form. And that's discussed very much as an assumption. And I have claimed and argued in many articles that it is possible to take this approach and to model the universe based on discrete computation. But it is not necessary. You can have also continuous computation based on analog systems. And the relationship between sub-symbolic and symbolic computation could be illustrated by this picture from his book. You see that he has made this from combination between reductionism and holism. You can write the reductionism with the small pieces of words, holism, and vice versa. That will say that you cannot have holistic picture without knowing the detail. And you cannot understand detail if you don't know where is it in the program this picture. So that's the relationship. So if I tell you about computationalism very shortly, this is the claim that nature can be described as a complex informational structure or a cognizing agent. Computation is information processing or information dynamics. Computation is constrained and governed by the laws of physics on different levels. And those can be seen as morphological levels. And now I can tell you about the Turing's idea. It's a very old idea that he called morphological computing or morphogenetic computing. He wanted to explain how the animal skin formed those spots. So he used the diffusion reaction model, computational model, to reproduce those spots on the skin of the animal. So he was not saying that he was performing computation, but that's what people today say. That he was one of the first people to understand that you can model those natural systems with computational models. So we have the interplay between informational structure and the computational process, which is informational self-structuring and information integration. And they happen in both synchronic and asynchronic and at different scales in space and in time. So those are the fractal structures in space and in time. It's very, very interesting work of Harvard medical doctor Alexei Kurakin, who was studying some medical processes and their fractal structures. So we have this morphogenetic and morphological computing, and they go from raw data to semantic information. So in this sort of physical or morphological computing, it goes on informational structure, and it leads to new informational structure based on physical processes from previous ones. Evolution, for example, is a process which is typical morphogenetic, morphological computation process. Now I can tell you about one application if you want to see not only the formal and the conceptual framework, but specific application of this approach in the work of André Eresma. She is not a French mathematician. She has written an article as an answer to my article in Infocomputationalism in this journal, which is called Constructivist Foundations. So I had this article, and several people answered or had here comments. Among others, it was André Eresma showing her own approach, mathematical approach, to this idea of infocomputation. So it is based on property of natural computation, which she calls multiplicity principle, which leads to the development of increasingly complex cognitive processes. So she says that local dynamics are classically computable, meaning the Turing machine computable, and as a consequence of this multiplicity principle, the global dynamics is not. So that's this new natural computing, which is distinctly different from Turing machine computation. And here is a picture from her other article, where she also elaborates on this model. So it is very important that she is using this dynamic category theory in order to model the systems which go from neuron level to consciousness in mathematical terms, and at different levels of description and across different time scales. So here are the conclusions. What I find important at this moment in the development of understanding of the behavior of big data and data structures and the dynamics in those data is the ability to develop this new type of computation, which is called natural computing. Natural computing is generalized model of computation. It's natural information processing. What is fundamental is interactivity and distributivity of systems for this computational modeling. Of concurrent, it should be concurrent if it's not sequential in general. Distributed information processing systems such as living organisms, their networks, or developmental or robotics and such things. And it will be instructive to study processes of self-organization of information or morphological computing on different levels of abstraction or different levels of organization, which are able to restructure themselves through interactions with the environment as a result of morphological or original computation. And now the words of Gregor Rosenberg and Laila Kai, who said, "Our task is nothing less than to discover a new, broader notion of computation and to understand the world around us in terms of information processing." So it will be to understand the whole of the nature and all the organisms and all inorganic layers, everything in terms of information and computation in different levels. At the end, I have some references. For example, there is an information journal, special issue on physics of information, where Hector Semir, who is from Unna University, and our guest editors, and we are trying to put together people who are thinking in terms of it from it and how the world can be constructed, modeled from information based on physical laws. And now some last references. This is a book I highly recommend it, edited by Hector Semir, with the introduction of Project Penrose, a beautiful book on computing nature and the relationship between information and computation, and some books that I was involved with, Computation, Information, and Cognition, with Susan Stewart, Information and Computation with Mark Bergin, and the last one from last year, it was Computing Nature with Raffaella Giovanni. And here are the articles that this is based on.